Our guest today is the Chief Information Officer and Chief Data Officer for the City of Chicago's Department of Innovation and Technology. Prior to this appointment by Mayor Emanuel 11 months ago, he served as the city's Chief Data Officer. Our guest today leads the city's approach to and use of data to help improve the way the government works for its residents. He is a former commander in the Chicago Police Department. He earned, number one, his bachelor's degree from Connecticut College. Number two, his master's degree in criminal justice from Suffolk University. And number three, his master's degree in computer science at the University of Chicago. And the smartest thing he ever did was to marry his wife, who is with us today, Sarah Duggan Goldstein. Sarah, there we go, welcome. And they have three beautiful children, Aiden, 5, Peyton, 3, and Aaron, 16 months. Ladies and gentlemen, Brett Goldstein. Brett?
Thanks, Jeff.
Have fun up here.
All right. So I got to be honest with you. I think this is a terrible idea. So who invites a person with a graduate degree in computer science to a public policy lunch? Jay. So yesterday I decided I had to actually figure out what I was doing, and so Jay was kind enough to mention my kids, and I was talking to my 3-year-old. So my 3-year-old, and some of you know her, Peyton, is a little spicy. She sort of says her mind, and I'm sitting down and I'm showing her my presentation, and as you'll all enjoy toward the end, it gets a little mathy. And I go, Peyton, how do you think they'll take it? And she goes, you're in trouble, Dada. So I wish you luck. I don't know if the bar is open, but I'll leave that one up to you. So, okay, so I know many of you, but 2 minutes on my background, because I am not your typical city CIO. I spent the majority of my career building a company, OpenTable, which maybe a few of you have heard of. Please use it. And so I come from the West Coast startup culture. So the idea of me wearing a suit and standing on a podium and actually matching and being okay is not a good combo. But that was sort of my core experience. But the funny thing is, after doing that for 7 years, I thought it was really important to do public service. I think if you have a successful company, you need to give something back. So what do you do if you want to do public service? You join the Chicago Police Department. And fortunately, as we've talked about Sarah Duggan Goldstein, I have a really supportive wife. So I actually joined the police department as a sworn member. And it was a really good idea until about 2 weeks into the academy. So 2 weeks into the academy, I'm doing push-ups. And I was 31 at the time. Everyone else was like 21. And I'm in extreme pain. And I have instructor Larry Snelling, who the cops in the room will know, screaming at me. And you had that moment there where I reflected on 3 weeks before I'd been in my beautiful startup office, enjoying my Starbucks, and now I'm doing push-ups on a really smelly rug. And you have that sort of epiphany then, I have made a critical error. So that was great. All right, so let's fast forward 5 years. The mayor asked me to join the administration. I was initially the chief data officer, and then I also became the CIO for the city. I'm going to talk very briefly about sort of the CIO piece, and I'm going to spend more time talking about data, because I think that is the interesting part here. So brief notes on sort of do it as a whole, because I know people are interested in what we've been doing and where we're going. So I came in as CIO last June. Now, there are a few things we needed to start thinking about right away. One is we need to think like an enterprise, okay? Chicago has a history of embracing technology. That's great. But it was conceptualized on the departmental level. Now, for those of you, many of you are in, how many people are in technology in here? Good answer. Okay, I think we'll be okay. Peyton was wrong. So if you build technology at the departmental level, that's fine at first. But how does it become sustainable? How do you, in a world of APIs, and I'm sorry, we're going to get a little of that, and integration and systems talking to each other, you can't build things that way. So since last June, we've had a very sort of forward-thinking approach to thinking like an enterprise. There's going to be a single way to do things, and there's going to be a right way to do things. And when we're making investments, we're going to make them in a way where there's an enterprise system that feeds all the clients. Instead of 4 systems being done in a mediocre way, it's going to be done once and it's going to be done correctly. And that's been something we've been pushing ahead on this past year. Secondly, evaluating what sorts of businesses we should be in. So a great example is the cloud, okay? So back when we were building OpenTable in the late 90s, you built everything on your own. Like I would live in a data center and I'd program routers and email servers and all of these things, right? It made a lot of sense then. But since then, the technology world has changed, right? Why would I be in the email business? I have 45 terabytes of email. Why would I deal with the issue of hosting that? When you can go to an outside party, it's treated like a commodity, and you get out of that business. It allows you to do things focusing on, like I like to say, I run the Department of Innovation and Technology. We have been doing too much technology and not enough innovation. As I get us out of businesses like email, productivity apps, reconsidering how we're doing databases, we're able to re-gear that. That has been a driving principle for the past year. Along with that has been encouraging nimbleness within the organization. If someone comes up with an idea and says, let's write some code to do this, honestly, I don't want to be talking about it for 4 months. I want to be able to prototype it in 2 weeks. So we've actually added more in-house engineering, where if I have a crazy idea, we're going to see if it works, rather than having to go through a long process. Government can be nimble. My marching orders here were to bring Silicon Valley standards to government technology. This idea of good enough for government work doesn't fly in Chicago, and it doesn't fly under Mayor Emanuel. So those have been some of the guiding principles here. But let's talk about data, because that will be 30 minutes of fun. So one of the things that Mayor Emanuel campaigned on was the idea of transparency in Chicago, right? So transparency has many different applications, right? In my world, it's about data. It's about open data. And when I heard him give, I watched on the internet him give a talk at Microsoft talking about open data and transparency. That's pretty interesting. And then when I actually joined the administration, I found, oh, that was my actual job. So what we've done is we have, how many people here are familiar with data.cityofchicago.org? All right, you guys are really doing well. So the idea behind this project and the idea behind open data is it should not be hard to get data out of your government. It is your data. So if you want to know how much I make, you should not have to file a FOIA, deal with a response time, get a response, it's in some PDF or fax or some nonsense like that. This is data we have, we put into a public system, and you're able to get it out. The old way of doing things was, and I think humor me if the example's wrong, but I think BGA originally had requested all of the salary data. And that was sent to them as PDF, and they had to then do all the work to post on the internet. What we've done in the past 2 years is transform this program. It started prior to this administration as a small, open data was a small program. It had some data sets, it had a little out there, but it wasn't of substance. And in the past 2 years, we've been able to turn this into a program that's arguably one of the biggest internationally. It's certainly the most assertive program in the United States. And the nice thing about it, so for those of you who don't have a background in open data, let's give the 15-second tutorial. It is data on the internet that you can pull down, whether it's a spreadsheet, whether it's a remote call from a piece of software, you can visualize on a map. It's there, it's accessible. Now, the initial goal behind open data was transparency, okay? We got that. But as the program evolved, we found it meant so much more. Example is researchers. So if, like I see the University of Chicago's in the room. Historically, if U of C wanted to get data from the city, it wasn't terribly easy. One, it would go through a FOIA, or two, there might need to be an NDA. Those of us who have dealt with these things know that they can take some time. We should not be impeding research. Now, if U of C or any of the other folks working out there need the data, it's up there, it's available, and it's sustainable. It updates on its own based on the software we wrote every day. But two is this idea of economic development. One of the things we did early on in the administration is something called Apps for Metro Chicago. Could people write software which would create a use out of the data? Anything from like an example like Spot Hero, which helps you find parking, to, is Scott Robin in the room? There you go. I always use a Scott Robin story. So this is, all right, I'm not going to tell the whole story, but I really like the story though. All right, forget it. So we had street sweeper data. It was not in a friendly format. It was about as unusable as you could get. But we took it, we made it usable, we put it into the data portal, and Scott wrote an application called sweeparound.us, where you enter in your address, and before Mr. Street Sweeper comes to visit you, it sends you a text or an email, and you can move your car and not get a ticket. Like, these are simple things that just make people's life better. So we have everything from transparency, how much do I make, to advanced research, to civic development and doing things better. And the philosophy here, and the way I designed this system, was we are staying out of the application business. We have created a platform of raw material that is sustainable and constantly updated. There are millions and millions of pieces of data that are constantly available there. And it's a program that the mayor's really proud of because it's something he said we were going to do, and we've been able to deliver on it, and certainly we're the nationwide example of how to do it. And it's become part of standard business practice. In the end of 2012, Mayor Emanuel issued an executive order which said that we are going to do open data throughout the city. Each department's going to have an open data coordinator, and it also created this chief data officer position, which was good because I'd been doing it for a while. So it worked out okay. But he had this vision toward the end of 2012, and it's actually been interesting to see. I think a week or two ago, the White House now has issued executive order talking about machine-readable data. So we've been in a position where we've been able to lead the way and actually get people thinking this way. It's been great. So data should not be siloed. This is important. So let's talk about, so I'm going to tell you a bit of a story about a program named WindyGrid, but let's talk about data silos. So you remember where I started, okay, we're still okay. Technology was built at the departmental level, right? So when you build technology that way, your data ends up living in the departments, okay? That is great initially, but it doesn't make sense when you enter into the world of trying to answer hard problems. When you talk about issues such as crime, is that strictly a police department issue, or does it also tie on economics, education, building, housing and urban development, all of these different pieces? But when the data sits in their different silos, you can't use it. You need to have an interdisciplinary approach to it. And by opening our mind and understanding that, you're able to answer hard problems. Because our job in data analytics is not to make pretty pictures and pie charts. It's to actually get information that informs decisions. So I'm going to tell you a story. So this will be fun. So it was, a year and a half ago, I was talking to Lisa Schrader, who's now our chief of staff. And she said, Brett, why is it so freaking hard to get data out of our systems about a place? If I want to know the story of 121 North LaSalle City Hall, Why do I have to ask 10 commissioners for 10 different reports and do that? And I said, well, that sounds awfully silly. So I'm like thinking about my data silos. And she's like, well, can you just go fix it? I'm like, okay. I'm like, well, we're going to have a baby soon. But it seemed like a good challenge. So I took the problem and I started to think about our data. Because what do we have in the city? We have enormous data. That is true. We have data ranging from 911 data to, Rosemary's permits and licensing and all of these different pieces, but they're not tied together. But how do we do it? So the old government way, which probably would have made someone happy, is a big RFP, right? So, hi, for $20 million, I'd like you to come and replace everything and build a monster system, and it will take 2 years. Right, and then it will potentially be legacy, because the world of data and analytics is moving very fast. Anyone who doesn't think that, they're wrong. And coupled with that had been the seed which came from Gary Schenkel, which was NATO was coming up, and we needed to have situational awareness for that. So that seemed like a good motivator. So I went back to my little office, and, well, I never turned on the lights, and I just kind of sat there and did some research, and I worked with some members in the community to sort of brainstorm, how do you do this? Because while we're pondering this problem, at the same time, the industry of big data is bursting, right? But the interesting part of big data and analytics is much of the work is being done in open source. For people who are working in the space, you're talking about systems like MongoDB, Hadoop, R, all of these systems. They're out there. So we came up with this idea, what if we did something on our own? And what happened over the next few months is, so clear your mind. Imagine a visual, small mayor's office. Lights off, multiple computer screens, all Unix, sort of your classic green screens. And I started building something. I built this, I use this application, this data system called MongoDB, which is free. It's open source because Foursquare had been using it. And Foursquare deals with enormous spatial data. So I built out, and I have to be cautious to take this too technical or my wife might give me the eye, a distributed MongoDB cluster, which what did it do? It brought in all of the data from our various systems. So I talked about 911. We wrote a hook into 911. I didn't talk about 311. We grabbed data from there. Then think about all of the other systems. I mentioned licensing, permitting, GPS. GPS data is enormous in the city. All of the city assets call us every 30 seconds and tell us where they are. And what we did is we left all of the systems in place. Old legacy stayed there, and we started to suck it into this big open source platform where all it cared about was the fact that it had a coordinate and a time. And it brought it all together, and then you could start to ask the question of place. Tell me what is happening here right now. And that became real. But the problem wasn't done, because imagine if I went back to Lisa and I said, hey, here's my Unix screen, and you can write some code and grab out the data. That wouldn't work. So what we did is and you have a picture here. So one, the system got named Windy Grid. Not my idea. I sort of lacked the whole creativity thing. But we took a map, and most people use some sort of GIS in their respective businesses, and we built a map on top of it. And what the map does is it creates a layer for your average user, because 99.9% of our users don't want to write code directly into that Unix machine. Instead, they want to ask questions, which help them do their business. So what does Windy Grid do? It does three things. One, you can ask it, what is happening now? Say you want to draw a box over, we're at Maggiano's, and you say, tell me everything that comes into 911 and any licenses that are issued. If we called 911, within 30 seconds, the Windy Grid system knows about it, and it'll tell you this is happening. That's situational awareness. Part two is the ability to have a deep dive. Say Maggiano's, we want to look at multiple years of 311 and 911 data to understand the distribution between those, because data needs to be accessible. For you to make a smart decision, you can't say, oh, yeah, it's too many years. We can't use it anymore because I had to go to archive. Nonsense. Whoever tells you that, do not listen. But now, in a matter of seconds, if you pull the history of Maggiano's, you have anything you want to know, or a ward, or any sort of box you want to draw. But at the same time, beyond the pretty pictures, what the system allows you to do is ask those hard questions, because everything's accessible. I was looking at a GPS problem about a year ago, and I went to the database guy, and I said, hey, can I get 2 years of database, a database dump for GPS? And he gave me a look like I was crazy. Yeah, this is not good. Okay, less math, more jokes about Peyton. Oh, and then there's 3. Okay, anyone else? What were we talking about? GPS data. Bad choice. So he goes, that data, well, it's off to archive. It will take me 2 days to get it out. That is crazy. That is not how you move the needle with analytics. So by building a platform like this, you can ask whatever question you want and get your information in seconds. And at this point, there's hundreds and hundreds of millions of pieces of data that are just waiting there for the right question. Now, why is WindyGrid important? WindyGrid was built by us. It wasn't just built by me. Like people like Danielle, who are in the room, gave up months of their life to build the system. And we did it in Chicago. Like, we have a history of saying that we can't do things inside. Instead, what we did is show our innovation. We showed that we can be on the cutting edge. We can build something that was built at a fraction of the cost that's better than anything out there. So it's a project I'm really proud of, and it's really a function of the Chicago team building things. We got one back. See, he was excited. So a second story worth telling is, many of you heard a number of months ago, Bloomberg Philanthropies issued a challenge. They said to all the mayors in the US, give us your best idea, and then we'll consider funding. So Mayor Emanuel then sent it out to the commissioners and said, give me your best idea, and then we'll choose among them. So that seemed like a good challenge. So I'm like, of course, we're going to have a data idea. So this was great. So we came up with this idea that's called the Smart Data Platform. The idea is taking the idea behind WindyGrid, but making it much bigger, where you're trying to do 2 things. The one that's most interesting is prediction. So many people know that I have a background in predictive analytics. I want to figure out, based on data, what will happen next. Imagine that within a city, where you know that if you see an emerging behavior, that something's going to happen. So that's kind of vague. So have an applied example. There's a small part of Chicago on the south side where when the alley lights go out, the garbage cans disappear. Okay, that's interesting. And it only happens in that one place. So imagine if you operationalize that, you can start to prevent your poor garbage cans from disappearing. Because as Brenna reminds me frequently, a fully loaded cost for a garbage can is over $200. Like, this is a city doing things smarter and doing things better. So we proposed an architecture which is taking all of the city's data and being able to figure out how do things tie to each other. So we can sort of realize the mayor's vision of being proactive rather than reactive. At the same time, with WindyGrid, we showed we can do hundreds of millions of pieces of data. How do you get up to 10 billion? How do you get it bigger than that? And there's a couple people in the room who are like, oh yeah, I can do that. It's harder than you think. And it's also something to remember that there is a ton of city data. And much of it, and I don't want to turn this into sort of data lecture, well, it already is. It's unstructured. It's dirty data. You need to be able to take it as it comes in and turn that into operational, useful information. When you have data like that, it's quite hard. So I was really excited because Mayor Emanuel picked our proposal. We submitted it to Bloomberg Philanthropies. And guess what? We won $1 million. It was great. So we were we made it to the semifinalists. And then we made it into the final round, and we have $1 million to pursue this project. So it's very exciting. It's also another, I talk about Chicago being the city of data. this is another case of where we're showing we are out front, not just as government, but as a city in how we think about problems and how we can do that. As we're an emerging tech center, this has become an area of focus. So taking this sort of big idea, I thought we'd move into the equation section of the talk, where we can talk about how these big ideas I mentioned are in fact quite real and how we're already starting to work there. So there's a project I've been working on for a number of years with the Carnegie Mellon Pattern Lab, having to do with how points move and change in space and time. So I need to be careful here because this will get interesting. So let's talk about math. All right. So all right. Whoever knows what equation that is, raise their hand and you win. Oh, just one. Okay, that's not good. Maybe I was wrong about the crowd. All right. So here's the idea behind CityScan. So I have argued for some time that cities are an ecosystem, right? I think we can all agree on that. Within an ecosystem are a series of ecosystems. We have neighborhoods, we have subsets of neighborhoods, and they all operate in their own dynamic, right? And when you take all of the enormous data that we have, it's points moving through space and time. So I talked a little bit about that before. But how do they interact? How do they relate? And what we've been doing with the CityScan project is determine at the block level, how do you predict a behavior? So, bear with me. As you consider how a block behaves in the ecosystem, you understand leading indicators. Remember my example of the garbage cans and the alley lights. The alley lights going out are a leading indicator to the garbage can disappearing. What this math allows you to do is it reads all of this data in and it creates models which say, will this behavior happen here for a given block? And if that block is going to have an emergence of it, you can then predict it. So when your alley light goes out, you can then deal with the alley light as fast as possible and prevent your garbage can from going. And this is a great case of where we have taken this math. And this is math that is now real and it's operational in the city. So, okay, that's a little mathy, but let's talk applied example. So what better than at lunch talking about rodents? Well, originally the slide had a graphic, so this is better. I figured the Unix output would be friendlier. So, all right, this is an applied case of math that we have proven and systems we've developed. So we found that there's a relationship between garbage carts that have problems and an emergence of rodents in some blocks. And we found that there's a 7-day window between those. So imagine a situation where we have over 26,000 census blocks in the city. So what we're able to do now is we take a year of training data into the system. We're able to identify blocks that we know that if they have a garbage cart report from 311, that in 7 days they will most likely have an increase in rat reports. Wow. Okay, I know rats aren't very exciting, but this is important. So here what you're seeing is us identifying blocks that are emerging the behavior. So this is a very practical example of the mayor's goal here. Be able to prevent rather than react. In this case, this allows us to identify blocks that are going to have the problem. We're now working with Streets and Sand on sort of an operational test here, and we can then start preventing behavior. But as you open your mind, think of all of the different cases you can do this with. So right now we're very good at the one example, like the one-to-one relationship. Here are my alley lights, here are my garbage carts, here are the rodents, those pieces. But as we work on this Bloomberg project, imagine where you're dealing with the entire system and how they all tie together. That becomes a rather advanced big data problem and an advanced analytics problem. So this is the future of Chicago, and Chicago is leading the way in this space. But this is all part of the broader portfolio of embracing data, doing things on our own, and doing things smarter. So parking. Okay? So my role in parking was the analytics, right? So what we and members of my team did was we spent the past 18 months dealing with enormous data. And I'm sure you all read the paper and all of those details. I kind of just know the math side. Hundreds and hundreds of millions of transactions. So what has changed here? In the past, we did not own our math. We did not do our own calculations. In order to be a city like Chicago, we need to be on equal footing with folks. We need to be able to generate our own equations and take them and apply them to our own mathematics. CPM is an example of where, as proud, I'm proud of the Windy Group project, I'm proud of Cityscan. At the same time, we took the math behind the CPM piece and said, we are going to understand on our own, we're going to build our own system, we're going to be able to model, and we're going to be able to have smart analytics. This is something that has changed with Mayor Emanuel's administration. Before, when you looked at, anyone want to work on this equation? Come on. All right, fail two. So before, we would not embrace things like this. We would not turn that into software code. We would not do our own simulations. That is something that has changed. That's something we should be proud of. And this is something that's not really normal for government. But in fact, it is putting us front and center on how to do things better and how to do things smarter. So what we've seen, the past 2 years have been busy. I think that's fair. So it's just in many areas we have instituted substantial change. Our data program, as I mentioned, is probably the most advanced in the country. It's smart, it's in-house. We're able to look at problems in a way that is changing. You know, I talked before, I was making fun of business intelligence. We have moved way beyond pie charts and distributions to how do you, ooh, the questions are coming. And how do you move into the space of making business smarter? And smarter is not based on absolutes. Remember what I said about the city. One rule that applies to one part of the city will not apply to another part. We need to not make big statements, but instead understand neighborhoods, ecosystems, tailored approaches. Be able to model what will happen so every day we're doing the best job that we can do for residents. So a quick note. So how are we doing this? And this is worth mentioning. The traditional way, and I know there are a lot of vendors in the room, so this will be good. So the traditional way has been very sort of vendor-centered software. And in many cases, I think that is the right approach. However, in the analytics space, I am a strong advocate of open source. So as I mentioned earlier on, some of the best tools out there are open source and big data. It's just, that's how it is. So we've leveraged things like Hadoop, MongoDB. R is a very robust statistical platform. At the same time, we've had great academic partnerships. I've mentioned I've been working with Carnegie Mellon for some time. I have a great relationship with the University of Chicago, which is something that's very, well, I'm an alum. It's very near and dear to us. And at the same time, you know, we've been fortunate to have places like MacArthur who have been supporting some of these initiatives. Like typically data is not sort of at the top of anyone's agenda, but these are ways we've been able to really move the needle. We have gotten away from the discussion of we cannot afford to do this to instead we are smart, we're going to execute, and there are great open source ways to execute on the mayor's vision. So I'm really excited about this. I think Chicago, we frequently get calls from other jurisdictions being like, well, you have this huge program, we can't afford to do anything. And I'm like, here's a link, here's some sample code, you're going to be fine. And this is, at the end of the day, this is really the mayor's vision. Like if there's one nugget that I'd ask you to remember is this, what he said this when he was on MSNBC talking about the Bloomberg grant, that Chicago will lead the way in being a proactive government. And that is the goal. And we're executing that from sort of the core technology to how we do analytics. And it's all designed to be sustainable, real, and be a game changer. So I think we'll go to questions.
Very good, Brett. Always like to have speaker with their own microphones. Listen, I know a lot of you have a lot of questions, but you got to put it in writing. No texting allowed. Mr. Tolver, remember that when they try to text you your questions when you were here. City Club E, where are you? Raise your hand. If you have a question, no one's going to ask you anything. We all know that equation. That was like, you know.
I had a prize and everything.
For all you baby boomers, that was like Dick and Jane. That was just nothing. All right. We have one question. Anonymous. Or it's MongoDB. By the way, that ain't to do with McMichael's campaign for Bolingbrook mayor.
You can stay out of that one.
Okay. I notice how I could lower the level of intellect really quickly here, don't I? Now, this is an assumption that you can knock out of the park. Given that data shows that charter schools don't perform measurably better than CPS schools, why wasn't data used to drive this divisive issue? Nothing like starting off with a sandbag question.
Wow.
If you want, you could give a equation for an answer.
So that would probably be my best bet. You know, honestly, I don't have an answer to that question. You know, certainly we work very closely with CPS. CPS is a sister agency. I have a great relationship with the CIO over there, but you know, that's not data that I currently work on.
Okay, we'll let him skate on the first one. Okay. Christy Hefner is back. Christy, raise your hands. There she is. She always asks long questions, but they're always neat. Center for American Progress. What underlies your work is the concept of evidence-based decision-making by government. How can government better use data to educate voters about the difference between investments and expenses, and how can media and civic organizations better use data and predictive and analytics to evaluate campaign promises and propose government programs? Boy, you come to the City Club, these are just like 3-inch putts, you know, just.
Yeah.
You can ask it, no problem. Take any aspect of it.
So I think that's a great question, and that's actually a challenge that we need to face right now, and that's there's two layers to how you face that. So one is this idea of open data. We've talked about putting lots of open data out, but how do you make it usable? Because there's hundreds of millions of pieces of data out there which can support these sorts of things, but for your average user, it's hard to bridge the gap between the two. And that's something that we're working on. Like some of us are talking about what does open data 2.0 look like. But in parallel, it's starting to get at Christy's question, it's starting to share the math and be able to say, here is the model in which it is based on, and have that become part of the transparency discussion. And I actually think sharing the math is easier than tying it back to my issue one, where how do you get people to understand that? Because you know, I shared a couple equations, and those were actually the easy ones. So how do we get to the point where we can do that? Because there are, I would argue, and this isn't always popular, that many of the statistics that you see out there are too simple. How do you provide complex answers and still have it be very usable? So I would say there's probably two paths. One, more transparency on how you're doing analytics, share it that way, but at the same time, there needs to be, as we live in the world of big data and advanced analytics, how do you make things like this understandable when clearly they can be challenging sometimes?
We have 3 more questions, and that's it. I know a lot of you want this to go on, you know, to at least 4 or 5 o'clock. Here we go. From Judy D. Martinez-Fay, is that right? There you go. Will the smart data platform be able to predict how the mega trend of urbanization will affect the city's current infrastructure? But every question is really simple.
Yep. So that's a really good question. So the design behind the system is to be able to answer extensible problems. And this is where some people are going to sort of roll their eyes, so just do it. So we are treating the platform as points in space and time and how they interact with other points. So with that being said, we actually have some really good proxies already. Like the CTA buses, I get a ping from them every 30 seconds. That's what, 2 or 3 million rows a day. So you start to, and there's all these new ways of sort of getting at traffic. And then at the same time, you have all the attributes of where people are living and all of those things. So the idea is the platform will help model it. Because remember, we're trying to get at what is happening now and what is tactical for today, sort of what are the potholes I should deal with today, versus strategic. How do I model, if I do this, what is the outcome? And simulation is right what you're talking about, so yes.
Brett, do you ever testify before the city council? Brendan, I just don't see it. I mean, I'll be honest. Okay, moving on.
They laugh at me.
I was going to say, well, they probably ask a lot of important questions. I mean, okay, moving on. B-I-N-U. How do you pronounce your first name, Mr. Mon? Binu? Binu, of course. Founder and president of UniB Solutions. Everything's new here. There's not a AT&T. Why don't you guys ask a question? I could pronounce it. Okay, Chicago-based startup Tech Data is everything. We made it simple to streamline and serve it. We can automate any process to improve, this is like a commercial, to improve operational efficiency. How can we introduce our solution to the various city departments? Send them a memo.
Give me a call. I'm right here.
You know, email that old kind of thing. And then we have Adam Heckerman. Adam, where are you? Raise your hand. Now you want to, is this another commercial? You're volunteering?
It's not a commercial, but I am volunteering.
All right. Well, I'll just give it to Brett, and he could deal with it when he wants to, because that's another kind of commercial. Brett, this was really informative. Everyone, clear your desk. There'll be an exam. How about a big round of applause for this?